honorable questions orales. L'honorable chef.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Just before Christmas, snow is a-falling. Finally, the Minister will table her economic statement after this Prime Minister has doubled our national debt, adding more to our debt than all former Prime Ministers combined. He's doubled the cost of housing with bureaucracy that has been hampering building. He's doubled the number of people who have to go to a food bank with taxes on food. We're asking for one thing: stop tax increases, stop inflationary spending, stop adding debt to Canadians. The Honourable Member, the Honourable Minister for Justice. Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of our economic record, and we'll present it on the 16th of December, so next week. We will talk about our record on the economy. Inflation is within targets put forward by the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada's key interest rate has gone down 4 times consecutively, and that is our economic record, and we're very proud of it. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. He's so proud of this statement that he wants to bury it in snow, Mr. Speaker. We want them to stop. Stop taxing people. We want them to eliminate GST on new home build, which would be one way of stopping inflationary taxes that have led to a costly life in Canada. We want promises to be kept. The Minister said that deficits would not go beyond $40 billion. Will she respect that promise, yes or no? The Honourable Minister for Human Resources and Energy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We know that housing costs too much, and that is the reason for which we have eliminated sales tax for apartments. Canada is building at record rates. We have built more housing than when the Leader of the Opposition was the Minister for Housing, and we are seeing results. The cost of rent has gone down this year in big metropolitan areas like Montreal. The Conservative leader wants to bring back taxes on building. His plan will increase the cost of housing.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, after doubling the debt with inflationary spending, doubling the cost of housing with more bureaucracy that blocks building, doubling the number of people using food banks with carbon taxes on farmers and truckers who bring us our food. Finally, they're planning a fall update, but they'll do it in the snow on December 16th. Our message is stop. Yes. Stop the inflationary spending. Stop the tax increases on food and homes. Stop indebting Canadians. Will they please just stop?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, on the 16th of December, we will present our economic record in this chamber, and we will talk about the fall economic statement. And I anticipate that you're going to hear a lot about the economic record that we've amassed. One thing that I anticipate you'll hear about is what we've done with respect to childcare. On childcare, an economic affordability model, we've brought it down to $10 a day in 8 provinces. That has resulted in 110,000 women joining the workplace. What is that record, Mr. Speaker? 85% of women are now participating in the workforce in Canada. That is a record high. That is what we stand behind on this side of the House.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what they've amassed is a lot of debt. In fact, they doubled the debt. This Prime Minister has added more debt than all prior Prime Ministers combined, which has caused the worst inflation in 40 years, inflation that is now rising as the debt is rising. Now, the Finance Minister said that she had a guardrail for the deficit. It would not go beyond $40 billion. If you go up to $40 billion, that means you've hit the guardrail. And if you go higher than $40 billion, you've gone through the guardrail. What's on the other side of a guardrail? A cliff. Yeah. Is this minister leading us off the cliff?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Let's talk about the spending that our government is doing. Let's talk about what observers are observing. Tiff Macklem, I'm pretty sure he knows who that is. The Governor of the Bank of Canada says we're no longer longer trying to get inflation down. Government spending is not pushing against getting inflation down. We have already brought it down. Let's talk about David Dodge, the former Bank of Canada governor who was in place when that member was in cabinet. He said because it was obsessively focused on reducing the federal deficit over fiscal years 2011 to 2016, the Harper government unnecessarily contributed to a slower rather than a more muted recovery. We're not going to follow that playbook because it didn't work.
And ask colleagues to please not take the floor so that we can hear the answer to the question clearly. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, in the spirit of nonpartisanship, we have put forward a motion inspired by the leader of the NDP. That's right. He has said that this Prime Minister is weak, is greedy, is selfish, and is beholden to corporate interests. He has pointed out that this Prime Minister has violated the rights of workers. So we took the NDP leader's words, we put it in a motion that includes non-confidence. Will the Prime Minister allow this NDP leader a free vote so that he can vote non-confidence for Canadians?
See, that is stretching the limits, of course, of question dealing with the administration of government, but I see that the Honourable Government House Leader is on her feet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One thing we know, Mr. Speaker, is that the Leader of the Opposition certainly doesn't allow any free votes for his members of Parliament. And what we also know is that he doesn't allow them to speak for themselves. What we do know is that when they put forward, try to advocate for their communities, what does he say? No, don't do that, because I don't think it's politically expedient for me. So what he does do is muzzle his own MPs, doesn't allow them to have free votes, and keeps them from standing up for their communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Saint-Maxime School is in the news for prayers in class, homophobic comments, and students rejecting sex education in classes, among other things. The Quebec government has had enough of attacks upon secularism. It is asking Ottawa to put an end to religious exemptions in the criminal code and wants to tighten up Bill 21 on secularism. Ottawa's doing the opposite. It's challenging Bill 21. It's just beating around the bush about religious exemptions. When will this government stop undermining secularism in Quebec? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague no doubt knows that education is a provincial matter. If he wants to talk about education and the way to protect children in the school system in Quebec, then he has to turn to Quebec City. This forum isn't quite where education is discussed. The Honourable Member for La Prairie. Quebec is a welcoming society that extends its arms to those who choose to integrate. And to integrate successfully, we all want to share the values that unite us and bring us closer together. Equality between men and women, separation of religion and state, French as a common language, the right to love whoever we want. Canadian multiculturalism says the opposite. There's no need to integrate, no need to adhere to any values. Don't change a thing about yourselves. Does the federal government realise that its multiculturalism is harming the integration of new Quebecers and harming Quebec's ability to live together? The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unity is exactly what the Canadian Federation is encouraging, and that's why in Canada and in Quebec we are proud of being a united party that defends the rights and freedoms of everyone, so that they can do what they believe is right for them. Once again, Mr. Speaker, education is a provincial matter, so we ask our colleague to turn to Quebec City instead of here about education.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Imagine this. A woman in her 70s, she's worked her whole life, raised her kids, done everything right. Now she's retired and her pension doesn't go far enough and she's got to skip meals. The Prime Minister believes that someone earning $140,000 a year deserves a check of $250, but that she doesn't. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, we're going to stand by our record of defending seniors. On multiple occasions in this chamber over the last 9 years, we've done things like change the retirement age from 67, as proposed by the Harper Conservatives, back down to 65. We've made targeted investments to improve old age security for those over the age of 75. Most recently, we put in place a dental care plan for seniors that has had, despite assertions by the Conservatives that it doesn't even exist, 2 million people sign up and over 1 million people actually receive services for the first time in decades. That's a record of serving seniors and assisting seniors and meeting them where they are. We'll stand by that record.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Mentioned that the minister didn't answer the question why they don't deserve checks of $250.
Imagine someone else living with disabilities, someone who can't make ends meet. The Prime Minister believes that this person doesn't need a helping hand. Will the Prime Minister finally see sense and include people with disabilities in their $250 check? The Honourable Minister for Justice. The measures that we have made on this side of the House targets poverty and targets helps people living with disabilities. We've added a benefit for them and them alone. What we want to do over the last few weeks is to make changes to GST that will help all Canadians. We'll always fight against poverty, and numbers show that we have managed to do so with a reduction in the poverty rates in Canada. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Today, the NDP leader has a chance to prove that he didn't sell out Canadian workers for his own pension. Now, he famously promised Canadians that he ripped up his coalition with the Liberals, saying they, quote, were too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. Now, Conservatives agree, and Canadians want a carbon tax election. So, will the Prime Minister allow the NDP leader to vote for his own words, or did the PM whip the NDP vote to block a carbon tax election?
I'm afraid that question doesn't, again, meet the relevance of the administration of government. I do see the government House leader rising to answer. Colleagues, a couple of things. One, let's just make sure that when someone has the floor, that no one else is taking the floor. And B, colleagues, I would hate for us to repeat what had gone on Friday. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you mentioned, there was actually no question for the government there, but if the member opposite wants to talk about pensions, he could talk about the pension of the leader of the opposition, who, because he's been here for 2 decades, is estimated at being about $2 million, Mr. Speaker. And if he wants to talk about muzzling of members of parliament, he should probably pose the question to the leader of his own party, who doesn't like MPs that don't ask the questions that he wants them to ask. In fact, we see all of them around the outskirts of the Conservative area in this House of Commons. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Well, it looks like this Prime Minister has lost control of everything except his control over the NDP. Now, according to the NDP leader's own words, quote, "You're never going to count on us if you're going to take away the rights of the workers. Never." Now, we've seen that this Prime Minister has done just that, ordering binding arbitration. But the question is, what has this Prime Minister promised to the NDP in exchange for their support for his failing government and his failed carbon tax?
Again, that is not relevant to the administration of government or about and the chair will have something to say about this at the end of question period. But I do see that the Honourable Minister was rising on his feet. I don't know if he wants to continue to respond. I see no minister rising. The Honourable The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, every time that there's a ruling about the government on this issue, there's an absolutely material question, which is the Liberal or the NDP say one thing over and over again, and then come in and support the Liberals. So asking what the Liberals have promised the NDP in favor of their support after time and time again saying all of these things, they keep supporting the government. So what has the government promised the NDP to avoid a carbon tax election?
I'm going to be offering a ruling at the end of question period. Perhaps I wish I could have done it earlier, but I see that the Honourable Minister is rising on her feet to answer. The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, in response to that member's question that, as I think we all know, doesn't actually have to do with government business, but the member opposite, and in fact most of the Conservative caucus, know a thing or two about saying one thing and doing the opposite. They've been talking about cutting taxes, but at the first opportunity to cut taxes for Canadians, they say no, Mr. Speaker. They talk about, standing up on behalf of their constituents, but when they try to do that, the Leader of the Opposition takes away their ability to pose questions in this place. Mr. Speaker, if they don't repeat the slogans ad nauseum of the Leader of the Opposition, they're simply not allowed to speak. They're pretty good at saying one thing and doing another. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
To be very clear, Speaker, the Leader of the NDP has gotten up and railed against the Liberals for the GST measures, against workers, every possible thing. The NDP has said the government is incompetent. They said they can't vote for him. Yet every time there's a confidence motion, the NDP stand up and do what? They vote for the government. So it is the business of this place. How much is it costing Canadians? What has this administration promised the NDP to get them to vote against their leader's own words?
Once again, the Honourable Government House Leader is rising to her feet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Honourable Member knows something about railing against a leader, but one question that she might want to ask the leader of her party is why he won't get a security clearance. I believe last week at committee we heard from another Conservative leadership contestant about alleged interference by India in the Conservative leadership race, but the Leader of the Opposition refuses to get a security clearance to actually learn about what happened. Mr. Speaker, he should put the security interests of Canadians ahead of his own personal interests. Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, on the 4th of September, all Canadians witnessed the Leader of the NDP ripping up the agreement with this Liberal government. He was really convincing at the time. He said the Liberals are too weak, too selfish and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for the people. That was on the 4th of September. But today, the 9th of December, will the Leader of the NDP allow his members to vote for themselves against him? And if they vote following the party line, how much will this cost to Canadians? Once again, I would like to encourage all members to refrain from speaking when they're not recognized in the House of Commons. Once again, we are in a situation where the speakership is not in the most enviable position because the question doesn't have to do with government, the government and its operations, but the Honourable Minister is rising. Well, the question is not relevant, Mr. Speaker, but one relevant question is why this Honourable Member can't speak for himself and speak for his constituents. His Conservative leader claims that affordable housing that are built in his riding and in other Conservative ridings simply don't exist. That's a bit odd. He says that housing projects don't exist. where there are hundreds of affordable housing units that are currently being built and that are built in Conservative ridings. Once again, before the honourable member stands to take the floor, I would like everyone to refrain from speaking unless recognised by the speakership. The honourable member. Well, my question was very simple. How much will it cost Canadians? The minister doesn't know how to count, but the minister loves to spend. So the problem is the NDP added another layer to this. The leader of the NDP said that the Liberal government will always give in to corporate greed and will always intervene to ensure that unions have no power. That's our motion word for word, Mr. Speaker. So what does the Prime Minister think of a leader who might vote against him? This Prime Minister, who has never respected his word for deficits when he announced to Canadians that there would be a budgetary balance. The Honourable Minister for Public Services and Procurement. I know how to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, Mr. Speaker. That's the number of affordable housing units that were built under the Conservative leader when he was Minister for Housing. 8,000 are being built right now just in Quebec, thanks to the $2 billion agreement between the federal government and the government of Quebec. And hundreds of these housing units will be in Conservative ridings. There are 50,000 that we have built throughout the country over the last few years. The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Mr. Speaker, yet another fiasco for the CBSA. With the failures of the CBSA Assessment and Revenue Management application, or CARM, 22 breakdowns in 1 month for an application that took 14 years to develop and that cost taxpayers $556 million. $500 million with just a 50% cost overrun, not to mention the fact that the agency hid important documents from parliamentarians. Today, the Committee for Trade voted unanimously to ask the Auditor General to investigate this latest Liberal fiasco. Will the government support our request for an inquiry? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, my colleague knows full well that the government does not give instructions to the Auditor General, and we respect the free will of committees to study what they want and to invite people, such as the Auditor General, to study important files for Canadians. We believe that the CARM system replaced one that was old. It was 36 years old. And we understand the private sector's concerns, and I have full trust that we will rectify this very rapidly. The honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. There's a real cost to the agency's fiasco with the CARM. There's one for taxpayers, $556 million, but there's also one for entrepreneurs. Their imports are paralysed at the border. They're suffering billing errors, they're being double paid for direct debits, and there are in-terminal delays for them. They have absolutely no customer service when the CARM crashes. And it takes weeks for the agency to correct its mistakes. What is the government doing today to stop making businesses pay for its fiasco? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Once again, Mr. Speaker, we of course, share the concerns of our colleague. We will support Canadian businesses to make sure that they pay the right amount in an efficient way. That was the objective of modernizing this technology. That started in 2010. So it's not just one government, it's two governments that decided to improve a system to make it easier to access, but also make customs easier to navigate. We will correct the errors. The Honourable Member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. The CARM application fiasco is not a first for the CBSA. The agency was also behind ArriveCan. Let's not forget the application that was supposed to cost $80,000, but that ended up costing $60 million. Clearly, there's a fundamental problem at the agency when it comes to transparency, monitoring of spending, and cost overruns. The Bloc Québécois and the Trade Committee have asked the Auditor General to investigate. The government cannot afford to wait for another fiasco before taking action. Will it put the agency under direct supervision? The Honourable Minister for Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, We have discussed here in the House a number of times about how important the work of the CBSA is, be it protecting our country, be it dealing with immigration cases, be it stopping the entrance of drugs like fentanyl. So the CBSA every single day does excellent work for our country. We fully trust their work. We will invest even more to support their important work, and that is exactly what we will do.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
The NDP leader continues to hold the country hostage, playing political hokey-pokey to secure his pension by February. First, he put himself in a coalition agreement with the Liberals. Then he took himself out, ripping up the agreement while shaking his fist all about. Now he's put himself back in, taping the agreement together, turning himself around after saying he would vote no confidence. So what deal did the Prime Minister make with the leader of the NDP to secure his vote of confidence, and how much will it cost Canadians?
Find out December 16th. Confidence is directly related to administration. What's it going to cost us?
In the opinion of the chair, this actually question is pertinent to the administration of government. The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the Conservative members of Parliament, all they can do is say one thing and do another. They're pretending to support workers' rights when in reality it's the leader of the opposition who brought forward some of the most draconian anti-worker legislation in this country's history. Mr. Speaker, we're going to continue to stand up for workers right across this country. It's a record we are proud of. It's not something the Conservatives can say that they have ever done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil.
Words matter. The leader of the NDP said he ripped up his supply and confidence agreement with the Liberals, saying the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. Speaking to poor workers before the Liberals violated their right to strike, he said, if there's any vote in Parliament that in any way impacts your rights, I can tell you right now, we'll vote no, whether that vote is a confidence vote or not. So what did the Prime Minister, what deal did he make with the leader of the NDP to secure his vote of confidence, and how much will it cost Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for Labour and for Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, Bill C-377 and Bill C-525 will go down in history as some of the most oppressively anti-Labour legislation ever passed in this Parliament. One of the very first acts of this government was to repeal both of those pieces of legislation. The author of those pieces of legislation was none other than the leader of the opposition, its chief architect, its chief salesman. He's the most anti-worker leader ever elected to this House of Commons.
Alors, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please. The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the NDP said that he ripped up the agreement with the Liberals last fall. The leader of the NDP said that the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interests. The NDP leader also said that the Liberal government will always give in to corporate greed at the expense of workers. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister allow the leader of the NDP to vote for the latter's own words, or will the Liberal government push the NDP caucus to vote against the leader of the NDP leader? This time I'm not particularly convinced that this is a pertinent question to government operations, but the Honourable Minister for Labour and Seniors is rising. Mr. Speaker, in the previous Parliament, Bills C-377 and C-529 were some of the most anti-union bills in Western history. the main spokesperson and the main architect of these bills was none other than the current leader of the opposition. So, he is the most anti-union leader in the history of Canada. I ask him to ask the honourable member to ask his leader about his leader's opinion.
For Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Women's Shelters Canada says that the housing shortage is trapping people in abusive circumstances, especially in cities where the rent is skyrocketing. In Saskatchewan, victims are fleeing to rural areas with cheaper rents, but with fewer social supports and public resources. And shelters in the Greater Toronto area are overwhelmed because rents are out of reach. Liberals have let people down. Survivors need affordable housing to seek safety from abusers now. When will the minister deliver affordable rent geared to income housing to save lives?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and
The
Communities.
colleague is right, Mr. Speaker. We do need more affordable housing in Canada. We do need more shelters in Canada. And that's why this federal government has put forward the National Housing Strategy that is doing just that. The member began her question by pointing to vulnerable women. I sympathize in my own community and communities across the country. It remains not just a challenge but a crisis, and that's why the housing strategy that I mentioned just now has placed a focus on ensuring women are housed who have experienced domestic violence. Why the Rapid Housing Initiative is doing the same thing. We have more to do, and we will do that work in partnership with any interested party. I know the Conservatives won't be there, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Mr. Speaker, families in Nanaimo Ladysmith are trying to get by, but times are tough, with more and more people relying on food banks. Loaves and Fishes and its many volunteers have gone above and beyond, but they require funding to expand and meet the growing need. Despite ample attempts, the Liberals have not delivered. So, Mr. Speaker, I will ask again, will this government finally provide Loaves and Fishes with the funding required so people on Vancouver Island are not left to go hungry?
The Honourable Minister for Families, Youth and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I often take the opportunity to meet with volunteers at food banks in my community here in Ottawa and across the country. And what I hear consistently, Mr. Speaker, is what a difference the Canada Child Benefit has made for families that are relying on a food bank for service. The Canada Child Benefit provides monthly support for families up to $7,800 a year per child. This is timely support, which we know the Conservatives would oppose.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Mr. Speaker, the government is introducing a 2-month tax break for all Canadians. After all their talk about cutting taxes, you would expect the Conservatives to walk the walk and support this measure, but they voted against it. Can the Minister of Small Business speak more about what the government is doing to make life better and safer for Canadians and businesses?
Good question.
Yes.
Good question.
The Honourable Minister for Small Business.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are all talk and no action. Starting December 14, Canadians will get a GST holiday. The Conservatives talk about axing the tax, but they voted against removing the GST off groceries and family essentials. They say they'll build the homes, but vow to cut the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is helping build hundreds and thousands of homes right across the country. They say they will stop the crime, but they vote against our gun control measures. As you can see, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives are the ones that are putting a stop to the measures that are helping Canadians and small businesses.
Order, please. The Honourable Member from Calgary Forest Lawn.
This Liberal NDP government created a fall fiscal fiasco as they failed to table their fall economic statement. After 9 years of inflationary deficits, adding more debt than every government before them combined, they have a lot to hide. Even the parliamentary budgeting officer said this feudal finance minister blew through her own fiscal guardrail of her $40 billion deficit. Why don't they just stop the economic arson, stop the tax hikes, stop the inflationary deficits, stop adding to the debt, and call a carbon tax election now?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that the only thing the Conservatives are serving up for Christmas dinner are stale slogans. They've been trying to change the channel. The Bank of Canada governor said at a Senate committee recently, government spending is not pushing up or pushing against us getting inflation down. The parliamentary budget officer also recently said the current fiscal policy in Canada is sustainable. He also said we could spend up to 1.5% more of GDP. What's appalling is to understand how the Conservative Party of Canada won't step up to support a tax break with all their obsession about tax cuts.
The honourable member for Calgary, Forest Lawn.
While the Liberals brag about turning temporary 2-month tax tricks like taking dimes off Doritos, common sense Conservatives will axe the tax for good because their carbon tax scam is driving more than 2 million Canadians into a food bank in a single month and 1 in 4 to skip meals. If they're so sure about quadrupling their carbon tax scam, why don't they just stop? Stop breaking the country further. Call a carbon tax election now so Canadians can choose between more tax tricks or a common sense Conservative government that will bring home lower prices and powerful paychecks.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives want to talk about tax tricks. What I think is interesting is tricking Canadians into thinking that they're actually serious about cutting taxes for Canadians when the first opportunity they get to stand up in this House and support Canadians who they know well have been struggling through an inflationary period. And they won't. They stand up against, they oppose the very tax cuts that they campaigned on. A GST holiday for Canadians on essentials over the next 2 months is a good thing. I don't know how they can deny the support that Canadians deserve.
The honourable member for Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, last year the finance minister said that the deficit would be less than $40.1 billion. And now Parliament's still waiting for the public accounts to confirm whether the minister kept that promise. Can the minister spare us the suspense and tell us what the deficit was for last year?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, our government has stuck to our fiscal guardrails, and that's exactly why inflation has come down for 11 months in a row, has been within the Bank of Canada's target range for 11 months in a row. We were the first in the G7 to cut interest rates, and we've had 4 consecutive rate cuts. And we're looking forward to this Wednesday with the Bank of Canada. We'll have another meeting and looking forward to their announcement. Thank you.
That's right.
Colleagues, especially the honourable member from Abbotsford, please do not speak unless recognized by the Speaker. The honourable member from Simcoe North.
Mr. Speaker, what is the point of making promises that you don't intend to try or even keep? In 2020, the finance minister said that when the need for stimulus was over, it would be withdrawn. They didn't withdraw it. Then it was that the debt to GDP ratio would continue going down, except 1 year later, it went up. And then she said the deficit would be less than $40.1 billion. And lo and behold, we find out she's broke that promise too. So when will someone at least admit that these folks are committing economic vandalism and tell us what the deficit is, or are they just worried that it's going to shred all the credibility that she has left?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Our government will stack up and compare our record to the Conservatives and run on that any day of the week and twice on Sundays.
Order. I'm going to ask the honourable members to please not take and have conversations over those, especially those who are using devices to be able to listen to the proceedings of the House. The honourable Parliamentary Secretary from the top, please.
From the top. Our government will stack up and run our record, our fiscal and economic record against the Conservatives any day of the week and twice on Sunday. And I'm happy.
Colleagues, the more time that the Speaker has to spend on his feet, the fewer questions we have to get through in question period. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government will run on our record on economic policy against the Conservatives any day of the week, and twice on Sundays. We have a AAA credit rating, the lowest deficit, the lowest net debt to GDP ratio. We have seen that the Stats Canada has revised the forecast for Canada for the last 3 years up, which is significant. And we're also rated by the IMF to have the strongest GDP growth in the G7. I think that economic record stands for itself, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. L'honorable député de Lac.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, ever since in 2023 the Safe Third Country Agreement was renegotiated, the Bloc Québécois has been sounding the alarm because there's a loophole that enables people who cross the border illegally to claim asylum after hiding for 14 days. And a CBSA report obtained by the media on Friday confirms that 1,900 people used that loophole and claimed asylum. That's just between April and September 2023. According to the CBSA, the real numbers are almost certainly higher. Will the government finally take action and do something about this 14-day loophole? The Honourable Minister of Immigration, Citizenship and Refugees. Well, if I understand correctly, Mr. Speaker, my colleague wants me to take action instantly here on the floor of the House of Commons without even letting the U.S. know. Of course, we care about safety and security at the border. We will continue to take action to guarantee that. I hope the Bloc Québécois will support our reform to the asylum system, which we'll be bringing forward soon, because last time, despite the fact that we were supported by the government of Quebec, they said no. It's really inconsistent, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member. Well, it's his job to answer questions. This is question period, Mr. Speaker. Anyway, this government has known for more than a year that this 14-day loophole is being exploited. It has known that for more than a year, thousands of people are illegally crossing the border to claim asylum, and it's known that that entire time, human traffickers have been abusing vulnerable people to the tune of $45,000. And yet the government has done nothing. It's inexcusable. It's inhumane, Mr. Speaker. Why have we had to wait until Donald Trump started making threats before this government would finally do something about illegal immigration and organized crime? It's known about this for more than a year, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Looking at recent history with bringing the visa back on Mexico, Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois was pleased with this, and we've been tightening things in the immigration system for over a year, and it's working. In November, the number of interceptions at the border was at the lowest level, and we will continue to secure our border.
The Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister's failure to table a timely fall economic statement goes to the core incompetency of this government. Canadians need a government to axe the carbon tax, build more homes by exempting the GST from new home construction, and fix the budget by getting spending under control. And Canadians are tired of waiting. Can the Finance Minister confirm if she will keep her promise that the deficit will not exceed her $40 billion fiscal guardrail? Yes or no, please?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, it is great to learn today that our government will announce the fall economic statement. It will be tabled on December 16th, which is good news. And, you know, what's interesting is when the Conservatives say fix the budget, what they really mean to say, like Canadians should hear that as translated, means cut programs and services that Canadians rely on. Whether it's dental care, pharmacare, early childhood and education, any of the signature programs that have supported Canadians through this inflationary crisis, they're going to cut all of them.
Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's nearly Christmas, and we're still waiting for the fall economic statement and for the public accounts, both of which should have been tabled in October. That's just basic management. Canadians need to know how much debt this government's piling on, and if this government can't even manage the basics, like giving Canadians the straight facts about the public's finances, will they call an immediate election so that Canadians can elect a government that will?
Hear, hear, hear. Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
I've been here for 5 years. Thank God for the people of Whitby. I have never seen the level of obstruction in this House that I've seen over the last 40-something days, where the Conservatives have continued to filibuster and block every aspect of parliamentary functioning and work, and they're standing up complaining that the fall economic statement is just a bit too late for them. Well, you have done it to yourselves.
I remind all members to making sure that they pass all comments through the chair. À l'ordre, s'il vous plaît. Order.
It's all your fault, right? Agreed.
Don't make me laugh.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-Lévis. We need to stop these tax hikes and the skyrocketing debt and inflation, but that doesn't seem to matter to the Liberal bloc. But it's extremely important to the common sense Conservatives. We need to leave money in the pockets of Quebecers. That's our vision. We are wondering why the Bloc Québécois voted twice against our non-confidence motions and propped up this bad government that is hurting people every day. When will we have elections so that Quebecers can finally do something to choose a Conservative government and keep money in their pockets? The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our colleague talked about common sense. Well, what is total nonsense is that in her own riding, there are 100 affordable housing units that are currently being built on Léo Couture Boulevard. They are currently being built by the Lévis Municipal Housing Bureau, and Minister Drainville from the government of Quebec and other stakeholders, and they're very proud of what they're accomplishing, and yet she lets the Conservative leader pretend that these housing units don't exist, and he also seems to want to stop construction of them.
For Fawn Woodbridge.
Mr. Speaker, the government has introduced a GST tax break during the holiday season that will help Canadians keep more money in their pockets, especially families with young children who need it most. Meanwhile, the Conservative leader and his party voted against this holiday tax break, all while they keep preaching to be in favor of tax cuts and helping Canadians. Can the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion please tell us what this federal government is doing to support hardworking Canadians during the Christmas season? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister for Diversity and Inclusion.
Mr. Speaker, it is indeed ironic that the Conservative leader, who loves to talk about cutting taxes, was quick to vote against the very tax cut that would put real money back in the pockets of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, we have already cut taxes for middle class and small businesses, and now with this GST cut, we're giving even more support for families. It's too bad, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservatives are only allowed to serve the needs of their leader rather than their own constituents. Our government will continue to focus on what matters, and that is delivering for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, everyone knows that over the last 9 years, this Liberal government has plunged Canadians into debt. And on 2 occasions, unfortunately, the Bloc Québécois has propped this government up. Quebecers deserve much better. Once again, this minority government has lost control of public funds, since once again it will be tabling the fall economic statement not long before the holidays. Is this the Christmas present that we're going to be getting? An extra deficit from this wasteful government?
Avant que je reconnaisse l'honorable ministre, juste inviter tous les députés.
I would just invite all members to not take the floor unless they've been recognized by the chair. The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. I know that the holidays are coming up, and the Conservatives love hearing children's stories and slogans, but even the member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier, a person I respect, but he knows perfectly well that we've made record investments. In 2023, Canada was the third country on the list of the countries that received the most investment, and we are investing in Canadians, in industry and Canadian workers. Mr. Speaker, we should be celebrating the investment that is being made in Canada.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Harshandeep Singh, just 20 years old when he came to Canada to build a better life. He got a job like many other students as a security guard in Edmonton. Just 3 days after starting this job, he was murdered on the job. Our heartfelt condolences go out to his family and friends at this very difficult time. But Mr. Speaker, his killer was a violent criminal with past police interactions and a potentially long criminal history. This government changed the laws to make it easier for repeat violent offenders to roam free in our communities. When will they take the safety of our communities?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I, like every member of Parliament, is very troubled by that story about that young man losing his life so cavalierly. And our condolences go to his family and to his entire community. What I would say with respect to keeping Canadians safe, what we're doing is working on multiple fronts. Part of that deals with gun control, and that's assault weapons and handguns. Another part of it is the bail reform, which we implemented at the behest of the provinces. And if there's more that needs to be under the criminal code, we are open to that. What we're also keen on is seeing in the province of Alberta and in other provinces, investments being made in courtroom spaces, in police officers, in JPs, and in Crown attorneys, so we can all do the work we need to keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, violent gun crime has gone up over 100% since they have been in power. And in 1 year, 256 Canadians have been murdered by somebody that was out on bail or out on some type of condition. Harshandeep Singh's murder and many others cannot be accepted as just an unfortunate, unavoidable incident. It is a serious systemic failure when our government allows violent criminals with a long criminal record to go freely in our communities. When will the NDP Liberals stop this madness and prioritize the safety of Canadians? Because if they won't do it, we're ready.
Great job.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the safety of Canadians is all of our responsibility. The tool that we have in this chamber is the Criminal Code of Canada. The tool that the provinces have is implementing the administration of criminal justice in their localities. What does that mean? That means hiring police officers. It means hiring crowns to argue about bail cases. It means ensuring JPs have the training to apply the law, and it means ensuring that there are detention facilities to house people who are being denied bail. These are critical facets that need to be invested in. We're doing the work we need to on the criminal code, and we'll continue to do so. What we expect is cooperation from the provinces.
The Honourable Member from Steveston, Richmond East.
Mr. Speaker, countries and businesses around the world are heavily investing in artificial intelligence. The benefits of this cutting-edge technology are already growing, finding efficiencies and spurring innovation. It's imperative that we secure the Canadian advantage. Can the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry update this House on how he's making sure that Canada leads the global shift to AI and that our workers, like the many AI companies in my hometown of Richmond, are the ones benefiting from the jobs and growth that come along with it?
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for a great question, Mr. Speaker, because AI is in fact the defining technology of our time, Mr. Speaker. It's going to have an impact on every industry and every sector of economy, and it's going to help with productivity. Mr. Speaker, just last week, we announced our sovereign AI compute strategy to help build more data centers in Canada, to build essential infrastructure in our country, and to make sure that small and medium-sized businesses could access compute capacity. Mr. Speaker, we're going to work on this side of the House to make sure that we continue to be leader in AI, in responsible AI, attracting investment, attracting talent. Let's celebrate Canada, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Rose.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, with the help of the Liberals, private investors have bought Norgate Apartments in Montreal. That's the biggest housing purchase in Quebec in 2024. And yet there is a housing crisis happening. People are very concerned about the fact that the Liberal government has let them fall through the cracks. Montrealers can barely afford rents as it stands. Instead of helping private investors get rich, the government could have helped build more affordable apartments. Why place the interests of private investors ahead of those of Montrealers? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. It gives me an opportunity to tell him, if he doesn't know already, that we have just made an announcement, in fact, in my writing, to bring 720 units outside market pricing. That's 720 new affordable units, because we don't just want to build new affordable housing. We want to make it sustainable and ongoing.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Canada Council for the Arts has not only had its funding cut in recent years, but significant inequities remain, leaving communities like mine dramatically underfunded. Today, MPs from 4 parties in this House have co-signed a letter, again bringing this to the attention of the Minister and calling for action. Will the Minister of Heritage commit to working with all interested MPs to restore federal arts funding and ensure all communities get their fair share?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister for Canadian Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether it's funding for the Fringe Festival in Vancouver or the Mermaid Theatre in King Hence, our government will always be there to support the arts. And I want to assure that member that I will work with him, we will work with him, and any members that are interested in ensuring long-term sustainable funding for the cultural sector in this country. This afternoon, I'll be meeting with the CEO of the Canada Council for the Arts. We'll take this conversation up as well. But, Mr. Speaker, unlike Conservatives who believe that arts are only an elite topic, our party and at this side of the House, we believe that arts are the soul of a nation, and we will be there to support artists and the cultural sector at every turn.
Colleagues, it's indeed my honour for me to draw your attention of members to the presence of the gallery of Ms. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, a joint recipient of the 2001 Nobel Peace Prize. Being 3:16, the House will now proceed to the taking of the deferred recorded division on the motion of Mr. Poilievre relating to the business of supply. Call in the members.